Hello and welcome to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We're going to recap regionals, go over some news items. We've had some newsy things happen around the SEC since we last talked to you. And then mostly we're going to preview super regionals coming up this weekend, of which there are 5 with SEC interest. So we will dive in a little bit to all 5 of them. And we will do that in just a second. But first, I have to let you know that this episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover is brought to you by Pitch Logic, the system used by players, coaches, scouts, and instructors at all levels of play, from youth leagues to the big leagues. The easy-to-use and affordable technology makes the platform accessible to every player at every level. All the metrics and features used at the highest level. See pitchlogic.com for more information. Mark, first of all, you were doing command center work, doing the Lord's work, you might say, keeping everybody apprised of what was going on. How was your regional watching experience, given that it was different from me, kind of sitting in press boxes trying to keep up with stuff?
So what I did is I had on my Apple TV, through the ESPN app, you can do a quad box. So I would have 4 games on at a time. And then on my iPad, I had Runes and Berkey and, their show. So I could kind of, I would kind of focus in on one. I'd have the sound on one, and then I would flip, change the sound, if something happened, something caught my interest. And then I would change games based on what, what the whip around was showing me, right? If I see, hey, this game is coming down to it, or something interesting is happening, then I could flip it. So it was pretty good way, I felt, to keep up with the action. Although there's just so much happening at any given time that that's challenging. And then there were plenty of upsets, there were plenty of tight games, and then you also had some chalk. I mean, it wasn't just all upset, so it was. There was definitely plenty to keep us occupied, I'll tell you that. And I think one of the takeaways that I would have is just kind of a global takeaway is you did see that a lot of the either mid-major or sometimes low major teams were competitive with those uber talented clubs, at least for portions of the game, sometimes all the way through. And I have a theory on that. I think a lot of it is those teams that are successful are typically older. They typically understand how to play, and they didn't beat themselves. Meanwhile, the teams that they're playing against, some of the most talented rosters in the country. But the way that you get recruited to those schools typically is ability, not necessarily skill. So I think you saw lesser talented skilled teams against really talented, sometimes lesser skilled, and you had to wonder where that mixture was going to be, right? So I do think that that's why that's kind of part of the whole baseball lingo, right? In any given day, almost anyone can compete with almost anyone else, especially, if you have the right guy on the mound. So that was kind of something that it's like a recurring theme all weekend. I would look and see, well, how is this team, hanging with, power conference team or ranked team or whatever you want to be. And that seemed to be one of my takeaways from it.
I think that's interesting. I think you're onto something there. I think about UConn, and UConn is kind of straddles the line between, they're in a mid-major conference, but we understand they're operating a little differently. But Runes made the point on Squeeze Play early in that regional that UConn does not look bothered by any of this. They're out there just cool as a cucumber, basically. And then you look at the roster and it's they have 9 Division III grad transfers on the roster. Right. And look, because they started Division III, are they as toolsy as Bryce Madron and Reggie Willits and whoever else on Oklahoma? No, but when you're comfortable though, and you've got skill, and you play to within yourself, and you don't make mistakes, and you don't have those boneheaded just brain farts that sometimes you see happen in regional play, that takes you a long way. I mean, Evansville is kind of the same deal,
Yep.
where that team's just old, and they think they're the best team on the field every time they step on the field. And this weekend in Knoxville, they'll be wrong about that, but they're still going to believe it, you know? And so, I like that. I like that. I like that theory. And it kind of takes me to my next, it's a good segue to what I was going to bring up next, Mark, which is just that for the SEC generally, regionals were kind of a mixed bag. Now you had some ups, right? Florida kind of seemed to put things together, at least for a weekend. And they get out of regionals when you didn't necessarily expect them to.
Right.
But the flip side of that is, we'll talk about Arkansas. They get eliminated, but also you had some 0-2s. Alabama and Vanderbilt were both 2 seeds that go 0-2. And frankly, in both cases, it was not just 0-2. It was kind of just like a uninspiring 0-2.
Right.
I
mean, it lost to 4 seeds. I mean, an SEC team should not lose to a 4 seed in a regional. I mean, we talk about it. Well, occasionally it happens in midweek, and a lot of times it's a motivation issue. Well, it's not a motivation issue
not here.
with your season on the line. Alabama gets shut out. I mean, Vandy didn't pitch well, and Vandy's been that's been the hallmark of the program, for a generation. And those were not good. And that's a polite way of putting it. But then you had others that I love the Florida deal, where all year we banged on them so hard for screwing up midweek games. Then they get in the losers bracket. Who's pitching in the losers bracket? The same pitchers who threw in the midweeks, but they had grown up, right? A lot of these freshmen had taken some lumps and they improved and got better and had different roles, and they pitched well enough to extend Florida's season. So that was impressive.
Yeah, the idea that Alabama could get shut out at Dick Hauser by Stetson seems impossible. Just given I don't even mean that necessarily disrespectfully to Stetson. I would not expect any SEC team against anyone to get shut out at Dick Hauser, because it's a hitter's park, especially for lefties, and it's just crazy. Yeah, and the regionals were not that offensive in general. I mean, we went into the weekend
season, yeah.
Yeah, like Runes and Berkey were talking on Swee's Play about they were looking at the home run record for a tournament, and because regionals was relatively down offensively, I've not looked at the numbers, but I assume we're not even going to get close at this point. Supers would have to be just an extravaganza for us to get close, I would have to imagine. So and it was a little cooler. I was in Athens and Clemson, and it was cooler, which was nice, frankly, but I think that maybe had something to do with it.
Could be.
But ultimately we were never going to know. It could just also be that pitchers were good, right? I mean, if you're at this stage, you can pitch a little bit. So anyway, but I will say, there were in Athens and in Clemson a lot of fly balls to the warning track. So and I know that makes it sound like I'm suggesting something nefarious. I'm not. I'm just saying that I don't know what the deal is, but it certainly wasn't as offensive as I imagined it would be. Let's talk Arkansas first, Mark. They end up losing that home regional. That was the most surprising elimination of the regional round. Just the fact that it was Arkansas, combined with the fact that it involved a loss to SEMO. There were 2 shocking things. One is that Kansas State got to Hagen Smith in a way that no one has this year. And some of that was okay, a Baltimore chop gets over Ben McLaughlin's head down the line, sure. But also, Kalen Culpepper barreled that ball. Chuck Ingram barreled a double down into the corner. They were making better contact on him than most teams had. So there's that. And then there's also just a totally flat performance against SEMO with your season on the line the next day. That to me is, because at least Kansas State is, they got talent. It's a Big 12 team.
Dudes.
Yeah, right. And no disrespect to SEMO, but you don't expect SEMO's pitching to come out and just shove against Arkansas in an elimination game.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So to me, that was just that part of it was totally shocking to me.
Yeah. I think for Arkansas, you have to wonder if they just kind of go through the regular season focused on the regional round And then everything has been pointing to that. It has so much importance all year because it's kind of assumed at this point with that program. You're going to have a great regular season. You may or may not win the conference crown, but you're going to be in a good position to host and be a top 8. And then you get there and, okay, this is the moment we've all been waiting on. So now let's do something different, or let's be extra good or whatever. And it's, I mean, I really think they've got to address that. This is 2 years in a row they've gone and just laid eggs. I mean, last year they didn't pitch. This year they didn't hit. It's just, it's a great program, had so much success, but I mean, what is going on in regional play? Because you remember 3 years ago when they went to Omaha, they did it on the road, right? So that they didn't have that cauldron of anxiety to deal with, for the regional round. And maybe that's not it. Maybe there's something else, just random bad luck, whatever. But I do think that, that's food for thought as you kind of go through the off season. How can you have this good a regular season 2 years in a row and just totally flop in regional round?
Yeah, it's interesting because they used to be a program that made regionals pretty routine. Like they were one of those places like, well, nobody goes there and wins. They're just going to run through that regional, and like we can have a different conversation in supers maybe, because there are places that are famous for the home team getting tight in home regionals. Ole Miss is one of those places.
Yeah.
Clemson is one of those places. Athens has been one of those places. NC State can sometimes be one of those places when they host. But not Fayetteville. But
Right.
recently it has been for whatever reason. And I don't know if it's something, again, to your point, it could be just randomness. It could be something. I think for me, the one thing that, and look, of course, this goes out saying, like, Mark and I are not sitting here telling DVH and his staff how to do their jobs. Like those guys know, those guys know what they're doing, like clearly,
Right.
but I think this is just plain to see. Like, if I do think there needs to be a change in philosophy with how they put their position player group together. Because this is now, we're going on several years now of the offense being a little less effective every year, really since the team that had Kerstad on it. And, there was always like a saving grace about it, right? Like last year it was, Jared Wagner from Creighton just being like, oh, he's a dude. And this year they didn't, Vahiva Aloy had a nice year, but he wasn't that. Like Jack Wagner didn't really play. The 2 Mizzou transfers didn't really have an impact. Hudson White came on late, had a nice year, but he didn't have a very good first half. So the transfer thing had worked for them for a long time. And I used to give them credit, and I still do, about like, hey, for a while there, they were really good about finding 3 really good transfers every year that would just fit seamlessly. Last year, they added more than normal, and they hit on fewer of them, it felt like. And I've had conversations with scouts who are just like, where are their homegrown position player superstars? Now, some of that is there were some guys who came in highly regarded who didn't work out. Mason Neville, who's at Oregon now. Drake Varnado, who went to Arizona State and is now at Lamar. So there are those, but there's also, Peyton Stovall turned into a very nice player. He was a catalyst in the offense for a lot of the season. He was their best position player, but he came in as like a supernova of a prospect, and he just wasn't that. And like I said, not taking anything away from the player he is, he's excellent, but it took him several years to get to that point. Right. And so the question is, like, can Arkansas get to a point where they're a place where they have guys who come in and you look around the league. I mean, A&M's had several in a row now of guys who come in as a first-year player and just, boom, they are excellent. LSU's done it with, Dylan Cruz was that way, right? And I get that I'm naming like one-of-one players, but you're Arkansas. Like, you would think you'd get some one-of-one players every once in a while. And that's kind of where I think, they need to get back to, one way or the other, whether it's finding high school guys or get in the business LSU, Tennessee, and A&M are in, which is like, okay, who are the top 5 transfers in a given year? Let's get in the mix for those guys, which they haven't been really in the first couple of years of the portal.
Well, I mean, you look at the top teams in the conference this year. I mean, you know, other than Arkansas, A&M had elite level, offensive talent, right? 2-3 guys. Okay. You look at what Georgia did with Condon and Collins and all these other guys that kind of stepped forward, right? You look at Tennessee with Christian Moore and Burke, right? Even LSU, with Tommy White in the middle of the lineup, or Florida with Cags, those kind of guys that can carry a team. And Arkansas, just to your point, just didn't really have that 1-2 guys. Doesn't have to be one. It can be a couple. It could be three that, you put them together and they give you that level of production, but they were just missing. And you kept wondering, well, maybe the pitching is enough that it doesn't matter. And then they had some pitching injuries, and that the pitching edge was certainly negated, even though it was still a really good staff. And it just fizzled. And there's not that superstar who can put you on his back and carry you, is gonna do that. And so to your point, I mean, I do think that those guys are hard to get, those elite players, and everybody's trying to get them. But if you're going to compete for national titles, you're going to need to get your share. And, we'll see if they're able to do that.
Well, and the good news for Arkansas is that, yes, you're losing, Hagen Smith this offseason. Mason Molina's draft eligible. So, he's a guy who but you're bringing back Gabe Gackle, and you've got young pitchers at your disposal. The pitching piece is fine. It's not like you're doing a foot, and so it's not going to take moving mountains, I don't think, to get this team. I mean, they were the number 5 national seed for a reason, right? So we're not talking any sort of total.
No, you're not blowing it up.
Right.
It's just you're tweaking it. Right.
Right. LSU UNC had one heck of a regional final. LSU came back through, got pushed by Wofford twice in the tournament. Kind of a weird regional for LSU. They got pushed by Wofford twice. The first day took a walk-off. The second game, the score looks like a blowout, but that doesn't tell the story of what that game actually was. They got down 5-0 in the first and had to claw their way back in. Then they get to a regional final. They handle UNC pretty handily the first game, and we got an absolute classic Monday night between those two teams. High tension. I felt like I was going to pass out. Just, and I don't care who wins. I don't have a dog in the fight. I just enjoying the game, but I feel like I'm going to pass out. I don't know how you felt, Mark, but I thought maybe it's prisoner of the moment, but I was having a hard time coming up with a regional game that I could think of. Maybe Tennessee Clemson last year in the 1-0 game. But other than that, I was having trouble coming up with certainly a regional final game that I could think of that stood up to that one in terms of drama.
Yeah, that is a great question. The whole time I was expecting LSU, just from what they had done and how they clawed back through the losers bracket, to just find a way, right? But credit to North Carolina, they were able to get some contributions from guys at the bottom of the lineup. As good as Honeycutt, and they've had plenty of great stars. But it was the role players that kind of came through and got clutch hits late in the game. And isn't that what, to me, that's what makes the game even more impressive, because for those couple young men that did that, I mean, this is the highlight of their collegiate career, right? They're going to be guys are going to be buying them beers and Chapel Hill forever over these moments. And that's and we got to witness it. So it's really cool. I do think that, if Christian Little is available, he got injured in the SEC tournament. LSU's maybe got one more arm. That's something that every time you lose a game like that, you wonder, what could the difference have been? And certainly, Jake Brown misplaying the fly ball is something that, I think he's going to be a star, but boy, that is a tough thing to overcome. And he's got to think about that, until he's able to flush it, because it's not like you get to play again next week and put that behind you. So, but you're right. It was an absolute classic. Two great teams. Would have loved to have seen both of those teams, move forward. But that's the way it was. That's the way it is, right? You get grouped together and the best team wins, and North Carolina got it done.
I say this kind of jokingly, but it actually might not be a terrible idea. You know who Jake Brown should call is Steven Williams from Auburn.
From
Remember
Auburn,
in that super when he had the ball
Yep.
tear him off his glove and go over the wall like for a home run?
Yeah.
Like he'd probably have some actionable advice because Steven
Yeah.
Williams went on to play several more years at Auburn and was a big part of things, and he might actually have some good advice. And you were also right about the players at UNC. They will not have to buy their own drinks at He's Not Here or Topo. That's a little local humor for those who are like me who are in the Triangle. Just there'll be time. We'll do postmortems on a lot of these teams as the offseason comes into focus. But when we talk about LSU, it's going to be an interesting conversation to have because how we view their season, I think reasonable people can have very different views on that.
Yeah.
Given the preseason expectation versus how they finished. And now, oh, by the way, this isn't like it's a super young team they're going to run back next year. Like they're rebuilding again in the offseason, and I'm confident they will. But again, they are losing some heavy hitters, both figuratively and literally. And that'll be interesting to see play out. Real quick, our last thing before we get to supers, South Carolina has moved on from Mark Kingston. I have a column on that up on the site at D1 Baseball. I basically wrote, and then I'm going to lay this out, Mark, and then I'll get your reaction to it. I wrote basically that this has felt inevitable from basically the day he was hired. Because there was just a certain subset of folks who were never bought into it, who thought at the time that South Carolina needed to do better than South Florida's head coach. Never mind the fact that he'd been to 2 regionals in 3 years and he got Illinois State to regionals. He'd been to Omaha as an assistant with Tulane and Miami. Like, never mind all that. And that's South Carolina saying this, South Carolina fans, we should be doing better than that. And then you combine that with that's not to absolve Kingston of everything, because at the same time, the inconsistency from year to year made it hard to convert the detractors. It was basically regionals every other year. And then even the years where there were successes, there was a lens you could view it through that would be critical, such as they get to a super last year, but there are fans who are like, yeah, but we were a top 5 team at one point. And then we were, we hosted at the very back of the list, and then we end up losing in supers. And then this year it was like, yeah, okay, you got to a regional for this in back-to-back years for the first time in a decade, but 3 weeks ago, we thought we were going to be hosting, and then we lost 6 straight games and had to do some work in Hoover to make sure we got in. So even his successes gave fuel to his detractors. And so that felt fitting to me. And it just, again, you go back to the start of his tenure, and it was like, I don't know how many years this is going to last, but it's probably going to end like this. So I was not surprised to see the news, although I also wouldn't have been surprised if you told me they were going to run it back one more time. Like it did feel like it was right on that razor's edge. Yeah.
And it was an interesting column. I would encourage everybody to go check it out. They did it pretty well. I think what hurt Kingston is, so Georgia last year moves on from Strickland, and Wes Johnson comes in and has immediate success, even sweeps the Gamecocks in Columbia in a really crucial series that they were both in a similar position. And, the winner of that series was going to be in a great shape to host. And Georgia not only won it, they swept. They host, they win a regional. They're in the supers now at home. And you've got to be thinking, why can't that be us, right? If you're South Carolina. And you've seen what Mark Kingston can do. They've had some good years. They've also backslid at times. And, it's just not certainly down the stretch, it was not aesthetically pleasing to watch South Carolina play. And I think, that plays into it a little bit too. So it's okay. Well, you made the hire. I mean, or you need to make the hire after you create the opening, and that's the hard part for me. Uh, you go through message boards and everybody wants to fire the coach. After, hey, the pitcher threw ball one, let's fire the coach. Well, okay, you do that, but now you got a whole new cast coming in. You got to get those hires right. So it's tough in this league, man. I mean, you're going to come in. There's no weeks off. You're going to be facing 13 teams. You're going to have 13 SEC teams that were in regionals for next year. So it's be careful what you wish for, because this could go in two directions. It could be a sparkling success, or it could get worse, right? And that's the gamble you make. But I think after you watch Wes Johnson, you got to think, well, if Georgia did it, maybe we can too.
Yeah, it's a great point. And there was pressure on both ends of it too, because they are looking at the early success of a Wes Johnson and others, and also they're comparing it to the latter Ray Tanner years, when they won back-to-back national titles and got to a third championship game. And the reality is that, like, no one is going to do that again, probably not in this era of, forget the entire nation, in this era of the SEC, probably.
Yeah.
And then sure, like in this competitive environment, I mean, I guess I shouldn't say never, because, had LSU won yesterday, maybe they do it because there's a path there. But it's unlikely. It's a lot unlikelier in a world where Tennessee's better than they were back then. Georgia's better. Kentucky's better. Texas and Oklahoma are coming in. Auburn is better. Like, it's just, there's just so many things working against it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, from the last time that job was open, it's a different job now. The whole sport has changed. You're looking at less development and more player acquisition and retention. Okay, you still need to do all of that, but certainly the scales have changed. And then NIL, how good are you at helping with that process and schmoozing with big donors who can help with this process, right? All of that kind of relationship building is different than it was even 5 years ago. So you need a different skill set. So I do think that this is not specific to South Carolina. You could say that to to people around the country, but they're going to be coaches who are not equipped for this new reality so they're going to have to either develop those skills, supplement their staff with those skills that they are either unwilling or unable to cultivate, or they're going to have to get out of it because they're not going to be successful without them. So that's going to be fascinating, not just for this hire, but others that will eventually open around the country, just to see what those hires and what their attributes that they bring, and also what they will continue to grow, because I don't think we're anywhere near an end state. Okay, so this is going to continue to change, and you need to have someone with flexibility and the growth mindset in order to evolve with it.
Yeah, well said. We'll leave that there. Obviously, there'll be more on this story. Kendall Rogers has a candidates piece out on the site. And look, Kendall doesn't just throw names out there for the sake of it. He's on his phone constantly this time of year doing this stuff, so he wouldn't throw names out there that were just totally out of left field. And if you look at those names, South Carolina's fishing in a pretty well-stocked pond. Yeah. We'll see how it ends up. Anybody who follows college football closely knows that sometimes these things do not go as planned, but we will see.
Correct.
All right, let's take a look at supers, Mark. Let's just jump right in. I find we'll talk about each of the 5 SEC supers in some form or fashion here. I find the most intriguing of the bunch to be Kentucky and Oregon State, which man, if you're Kentucky, you're the number 2 overall seed, so you like your chances of getting through. And it just so happens that an Oregon State team that honestly is probably more talented than the number 15 national seed, and maybe got hurt by the fact the Pac wasn't very good this year, just happens to be sitting there. They if they thought pitching to Charlie Condon this season was tough, well, here comes Travis Bazzana, who's just about as good, and it just a very deep lineup. It just seems like a tough draw for a team that's trying to break through to Omaha for the first time in program history.
Yeah, I can remember when the seeds were announced, and some of the comments I saw online was Kentucky being excited they weren't the number 1 seed, because the number 1 seed, doesn't win it, since 1999. Well, if you were number 1 this year, you'd be playing Evansville right now instead of Oregon State. Ooh, boy, that's a difference. Oregon State is one of the most talented teams remaining, and they just happened to draw the number 2 team. And, if you're Kentucky, well, you just had a pretty good group there. You had to beat Indiana State. That was, certainly a quality club. Well, Oregon State's a more talented version of that. So I do think that you're right. This is probably the biggest toss-up, or the biggest question. Can the home team advance, just because of how good the visitor is? Yeah. And the other thing that you actually brought this to my attention first is the Sunday night game starts at 9 p.m. local time in Lexington. Did they think the game was in Corvallis?
Yeah,
that's awful. Sunday night. You could sort of find a way to do it on Friday or Saturday, but you're going to schedule a Sunday night at 9 p.m. I mean,
makes absolutely no sense to me. I think it's
yeah,
right. I think it's not just silly. I think it's kind of like, abusive is too strong a word, but I'm struggling to find a better one. Like that, exploitive. Like, I mean, in a best case scenario, that game is going to end at midnight.
Mm-hmm.
In like a pretty, chances are it's going to end after midnight. It just seems strange. But yeah, if it had been on Friday, like, I still wouldn't like it, but it was like, well, okay, but at least it's not 2:00 on a Friday when your fans maybe can't get there.
Right.
But it's Sunday.
Yeah.
Anyway, that weird, but so yeah, tough one for Kentucky. I think the positive spin here, I mean, is that, you've played Tennessee and Arkansas and Georgia. And so, like, it's not like Oregon State's going to come in and show you something you haven't seen necessarily, but as the number 2 overall seed, you just kind of hope that maybe it would be a draw that's a little more favorable. Tough specifically for UK's pitching. It's not just Bazzana. It's a pretty deep lineup. They've got some older guys there. I do think, the Beavers have, and look, Mark and I obviously are not paying as close attention to Oregon State as we are the SEC, but they do have like a steady rotation. Like, they've run out a similar rotation week after week after week this season, and they're solid, but they're not just blow your doors off, like, in terms of stuff. So I do think Kentucky will be comfortable with what they see on the mound. Now, whether or not they can do enough, we'll find out. But it's not necessarily going to come in there and be like, these guys are, throwing something that we've not seen. They're throwing high 90s fastballs and breaking balls that are just, wipeout type stuff. They're very good pitchers. Aiden May, Jacob Kamatz, very, very good pitchers. But I think it's pitchers that, if this Kentucky offense this weekend hits as well as they have all season, they will be okay on that end. I worry more about Kentucky's pitching holding up against the Oregon State lineup.
Yeah, I would agree there.
I would say the next most interesting to me, Mark, is Georgia and NC State. The vibes reason, we could probably come up with some like actual matchup reasons, but for me, the vibes reason why this feels a little bit tough is that the regional, like, look, Army hung in there, but I was there in Athens. It was one of those games where, it was close, and there were times when Army was winning, but I always felt like Georgia was going to win that game.
Mm-hmm.
And then they handled UNCW, and then the Georgia Tech game was hanging in the balance, but that was the first regional final. I say all that to say this is all felt, you mentioned Wes Johnson coming in and just immediately it just clicked. It's just all felt like a little too easy almost. And again, there have been struggles. They struggle on the mound sometimes. They got pushed a little bit in the regional last weekend, but in terms of just like, it's all coming so fast. Like they went from being out of a regional last year to being a top 8 national seed this year and being 2 wins away from getting to Omaha for the first time since 2008. Like that's warp speed. And so I do wonder if there's like a little bit of, whether it's just one game or whether it's the whole weekend, I do wonder if there's a little bit of a reality check with a veteran NC State team that's playing really, really well right now.
Yeah. I mean, the concern obviously is just, can they pitch enough? Right. And they've had moments this year where they did. And, pitching was, I would say, adequate this weekend. It's not really a glowing endorsement, though, is it? I do think that they've got to get a deeper start out of Finley. And then, Smith is obviously a real key. I don't know where they would throw those in, considering Finley pitched a little bit, in the finale. I don't know if that changes anything. But I do think that with NC State, I mean, that's a club that's got plenty of pelts on the wall. They have had success against the best teams they played. So they're going to come in and they're not going to be afraid of this. And I know it's going to be a real fun atmosphere and be wild, but they've seen similar. So that to me is another toss up. I mean, it's Georgia's at home. They have Charlie Condon. Those are 2 big checks on their side, but NC State's a really good club, and I think I won't be surprised either way this one goes. I hope it goes 3 games. That'll be a fun one.
I think so. I think this has a chance. I said this on radio earlier today that I think this super regional, if you made me pick one that's just going to be like 3 close games that come down the wire, I think I'd go this one.
Yeah, a lot of offense too.
Yeah, they're similarly built teams. NC State has maybe more options it likes, but if you look at their pitcher stat pages, there's a lot of ugly numbers there. But when you read stuff from people who do know NC State better than we do, they say a lot of the same things that people say about Georgia, which is just that, well, it's been better the last 4 to 6 weeks. They found some guys, they got some guys healthy, yada, yada, yada. But you made a point about Finley and Smith. Neither of them really, in their starts anyway, neither of them really gave them very good starts. I mean, Finley got run pretty early against and wasn't efficient against Army. Wes said like the game really sped up on him there. Colton Smith made it through 4 innings, but he walked 6 dudes. If they pitch like that this weekend, that's probably not going to work. Yeah. The bullpen was very good for Georgia this weekend, but NC State's not, no disrespect, they're not Georgia Tech, UNCW, and Army. Like, they're going to lose probably if they don't get more from their starting pitchers this weekend. That's kind of my feel on it. And your point about NC State is good. I was going to read off just so we're clear. Like, here are the teams in ACC play NC State won series against: Duke, and some of these are not good teams. Like Notre Dame is not a good team, but Duke, Clemson, North Carolina, split with Florida State, Virginia, Wake Forest. That is basically all of the really good teams. Right. Like, I don't know who else is missing in that group. I'm sure there's someone I'm just not thinking of, but that's everybody who was good in the ACC this year. So, like, they're not going to go into Athens and be like, oh my God, we can't. No, like, those teams I rattled off are in the realm of being as good as Georgia, and some of them are better. North Carolina, I think, is better. Anyway, it should be a fun weekend in Athens. Our shotgun Spratling will be in Athens for that one this weekend. I think he's in for a treat. I will be, Mark, at Clemson in Florida. You may have already seen a lot about it. Kevin O'Sullivan, you may have heard, used to coach at Clemson alongside Eric Bakich, current Clemson coach. I imagine there will be several stories that come out this week about that specific thing. It is a cool little subplot, but fascinated by this matchup. Florida's pitchers, as you alluded to, kind of seem like they're growing up
Mm-hmm.
before our eyes. That is important because the Clemson offense is solid. Cam Kennerell is a superstar,
Yeah.
but they've also got some nice veteran pieces. The matchup I'm more concerned with, though, is that Clemson has a couple of guys in the rotation, Tristan Smith and the freshman Aiden Canuck, who's been excellent
Mm-hmm.
this year, who are really, really good. And I do wonder if they're going to be able to give this Florida offense that let's face it, once you get past Cags, a lot of holes in swings in this
Mm-hmm.
Florida offense. I wonder if that unit gives them some fits this weekend, and if it'll ultimately be too much for the Florida offense to be able to overcome.
Well, that would certainly be the smart money. I mean, Clemson has been the better team all year. Florida had finished strong enough. They won in Athens, then went and played kind of over their heads in Stillwater. I mean, they were really good. And Ashton Wilson, who, just come out of nowhere, Ty Evans gets hurt. He gets inserted into the lineup. And I mean, he was the MVP of the Stillwater Regional. I mean, this is a guy who couldn't get on the field for, 85% of the season. And that's one of the, in the non-CAGs category, he might have been their best hitter. So, and Colby Shelton has done some things. He certainly, it's in there, right? It's just a question of, will he have a good weekend or not? And I do think that on the mound, with the way Liam Peterson has found it, that gives them a difference maker, because he's, he has been during the last surge what Cags was, in the middle of the year when he was pitching well, and they've kind of swapped. So, but with Cags, obviously it's in there, and he's going to compete hard. So, and the stuff's there. So that's a pretty good combo. He's just got to locate. So I do think that has that has potential to go 3 games as well. I do think that, especially with the way hot day and you get a little wind shooting out, that would, that probably plays to Florida's strength, because they need the home run to score, and where Clemson is much more multiple. But I do think that that is, one of the most intriguing ones. I think we've covered, from my perspective, the 3 that I have the most doubts about. Right? I think in the other series, the favorites, I would be surprised if any of them didn't advance. With these 3, maybe a little, but not much.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Yeah, I mean, we just use that to move on to our next one, Texas A&M and Oregon. And,
Mm-hmm.
I have to be honest, this is actually, of the 5 opponents for SEC teams this weekend, this is actually the one I know the least about. And you might be saying, wow, Joe, you know more about Evansville? And the answer is yes. And that is just specifically because, for those who don't know, I do some freelance work with the Missouri Valley Conference throughout the season. So I actually do know a decent bit about that league. So I do happen to know about Evansville. So Oregon is really kind of my blind spot. I think the one key statistic, honestly, Kendall Rogers put in one of our internal D1 baseball chats, that the highs in College Station this weekend are supposed to be mid to high 90s. Eugene, Oregon is not typically that. So that could be a tough deal there for the Ducks. But, you do have to, of course, respect them, because it's a second straight super regional for Oregon. And, they just came out of a regional were they a 3 or a 2, Mark?
There were 3.
They were 3. Yeah. So, so you do have to respect them on some level. I just don't, based on my limited knowledge of Oregon, I don't feel like it's a great matchup for them, but obviously we'll have to see.
Yeah. And with A&M, it's all about, will they get enough pitching? I think, Braden Montgomery is swinging a little better. The offense is, especially in warm weather, that at all. So it's, if Prager's going to be good, it's what does Sadeo give you? If there's a game 3, what does that look like? Can they get it to Aschenbach? So, it's all those same questions that we've wondered about, in a small weekend. That's the key for A&M, because if they play their game, they're going to win. They're at home, and they're uber talented. and one of the best teams in the country all season.
Yeah, there's a phrase in I'm a tennis guy as well. There's a phrase in tennis that the match is on one player's racket. So like, yeah, okay, like if Rafael Nadal plays terrible, like this other guy could maybe beat them, but the match is on Nadal's racket. If he plays well, there's no shot. That's what it feels like with A&M. Is it's on their racket. Like if A&M plays its game, like I don't think Oregon's going to be in the mix there. But I've been wrong before, believe it or not, Mark. The last series we've got is Tennessee and Evansville. Again, this is one if Tennessee even really plays its B- game, I think is fine. I will prepare ahead of time, Tennessee fans, for the idea that oftentimes with these mid-majors in particular that get through to supers, they are going to come out like a house of fire. And so is it possible they put up like 3 runs on Chris Stamos in the first inning? Yes. But that doesn't mean anybody should be panicking. They are a pitch to contact team, Evansville is.
Yeah.
And they do that at a high level. Like I should give them credit. Like a freshman lefty went to ECU last weekend and shut them down on Friday. So like if you can do that, you can really play. But it is a pitch to contact team, pitching staff pitching against a team in a ballpark that you do not want to pitch to contact against. Right. So I just think it's a bad matchup for Evansville. I do think we should, obviously we give a ton of credit to Evansville. It's a great story. It is an old offense. They also carry themselves. I did my anonymous scouting stuff today on Evansville. That'll be in our super regional preview. And the coach I was talking to says like, they're confident bordering on cocky. Like they're going to show up thinking they can win this thing. And like, so at a bare minimum, you're going to get a good shot from them. Don't think it's going to be enough, but they are certainly going to come in ready to take some cuts.
Yeah. I do think that Tennessee, and you're going to be playing at home and people are going to be telling you how great you looked in the regional and who's this team coming in again? Or what are they about? It probably wouldn't be the worst thing if for Tennessee, if Evansville gets your attention early, right? Maybe if even get a little bit of some chirping going on, right? So that they get the ball's attention, because it would be easy to sleepwalk when. And I know you think about this, you're 2 games away from Omaha, which is your dream, right? But sometimes it's really hard to be focused because you're already thinking about that steak or getting into the ballpark and dogpiling, in the Schwab, right? Or, all these things. But there's business to take care of first. And obviously, as you said, it's on their racket. So if Christian Moore and Blake Burke and all those cats hit the ball out of the park, I mean, I don't see any way Evansville is going to be able to play with them. But, if not, I'm sure this cut will be clipped and it'll be on Evansville's highlights. So, you win either way.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah. Yeah, if we end up getting clipped, hey, you know what? It's
happened before.
That's the way it happens. Congratulations to Evansville. Yeah. If you end up hearing this on some other Evansville social media account, then congratulations on your win, and hello to SID Tom Benson for listening to this. Yeah. So, but again, it's a great story for Evansville. We're joking, but like, it's just there's a talent discrepancy. I don't think it's a good matchup, but we will see. That's the beauty of the games. You got to play the games. You got to win. You got to actually go out there and win it. So real quick, just so you know where we stand on this, I will be at Clemson in Florida. Burke Granger will be at Kentucky, Oregon State. I sent my condolences to Burke earlier today for having to do a 9 p.m. local start time. Also, he has a day job and may have to be at work the next day. So that is a tough one. Shotgun Spratling will be at Georgia, NC State. And then, of course, Kendall Rogers will be at A&M, Oregon. So we have all but the one confirmed to be covered. And we may still have someone end up in Knoxville after all, especially if that super gets interesting, right? Then certainly we will probably have someone there on the scene. But the other 4, we will have someone there from the very start. of the event. Looking forward to it. Mark will be doing command center work again. So if you're looking for a high level overview of not just the SEC super regionals, but everything, Mark will have you there. I think it's even the non-SEC super regionals, I think we've got some interesting ones. So I'm looking forward to kind of flipping around. I want to see if West Virginia can get Randy Mazey to Omaha. I'm, kind of fascinated by that storyline. Virginia seems to sneak into Omaha every year, like through a back door, right? Like they're never a team that we're like, well, there's a juggernaut that's going to Omaha. But they always seem to find their way there. And can Kansas State slow them down? And then also can UConn get past Florida State and get to Omaha? That's another program that's just been knocking on the door for a long time now, trying to get in. And so can they pull it off in Tallahassee against a Florida State team that doesn't just look, that is really, really good. So should be a fun weekend.
And there's also a chance for all SEC, all ACC College World Series. I mean, the way the bracket is, you could have only 2 conferences represented, which I'm not sure I'm not that crazy about, but that is the line that we'll be watching this weekend.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I know. As a college baseball fan, I've said this before, I'm not crazy about it. I'll just go on the record with that, but it is, it is a possibility. So we do have to discuss the possibility of that happening. I want a healthy college baseball ecosystem. So that's my primary concern there. But yeah, I mean, those 2 leagues they both put 5 into super regionals, and they've earned it. So here they are, So, all right, that is going to do it for this edition of the Highway to Hoover podcast, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. Use code SEC Play to get 24% off a subscription if you want to jump on board now. If your team is at the super regional round, you're looking to jump on board for the rest of the way, hoping to get to Omaha, this would be a good time to do so. So use the code SEC Play 24 to get 24% off that subscription. Thank you to Pitch Logic for sponsoring this and every episode of Highway to Hoover. Thank you to Mark, as always, for joining me, and thank you, the listeners, for listening. We will talk to you again around this time next week as we get you ready for the College World Series. Looking forward to that. Enjoy the super regional baseball, everyone. We'll talk to y'all soon.